Hi, everyone. Hey, am I interviewing you or are you interviewing
I think
me?
I'm interviewing you because it's your book tour.
Okay.
So, which is very exciting. And I read your book after we met, and I was really moved. And I thought, when you see the cover of a book and then you sort of you kind of get this idea that it's a sexual memoir, you're not really prepared to get emotional about it. But I found your story to be very, very kind of concurrent with mine in a lot of ways. And so I want to ask you, what prompted you to write about your sexuality, but then it's actually so much more? What did you think that you were going to write about your sexuality, or did you know that it was going to be deeper?
When I first started, I had no idea how deep it was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
I was originally doing it as a way of communicating what Kinky Salon was.
Yeah.
And then I started to write the really personal stories, and it just started to flood out of me. And I had editors who were kicking my ass as well, being like, tell this part, why are you holding back? Why are you holding back? And I couldn't have done it without the editors kicking my ass, because it was a pretty scary process. But every time I wrote the really real stories, I also felt like I was writing the best things that I had written, you know?
Yeah.
So it was like I could tell when I was writing it that the really powerful stuff were the really hard stories to tell.
Right.
And once I started going down that rabbit hole, I guess it just developed. And, the kind of self-awareness that I was getting, like I was looking at things that I hadn't even thought about since I was young, and I was really like overwhelmed at how cathartic it was and how painful it was and how I felt like it was such a healing process to do that, to go through that.
Yeah, it is a healing process. And I think what is really interesting, one of the things that, I hope you don't mind me revealing, I mean, you've got to read the whole book because it's really great, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is anorgasmia.
Yeah.
Like, that's a really intense thing to talk about, but at the same time, to be a sex-positive individual, to promote these parties, to promote the kind of freedom in sexuality, but to have that inside is a very deeply, it's a deeply felt thing. It's something that I understand and I endure too, because you think we've got to have the answers to everything if we're going to be free. But then we can't even unlock your own body.
Yeah.
It's very scary.
And that was part of the original fears that I had, was that I was like, I felt like a fraud, when I was throwing parties and like having all this crazy stuff happen around me and being really into it and loving it, and loving being part of it. But I felt like a fraud. I felt like, how can you possibly be that person that you claim to be when you can't even be connected to your body in a way that makes you feel confident about yourself? So, yeah, I felt like a fraud. I didn't tell anybody for many years. It was like a really, really shameful secret. Even though, I mean, this is the crazy thing, right? Is that like my mom was a sex therapist, and she told me how normal it is for people, young women in their early 20s, late teens, to really not have this experience. There's all kinds of reasons why it happens. And so even though I had this mother who was being incredibly reassuring, I still was so ashamed, And so I think that's a real tale of, how difficult it is for women in our culture and expressing their sexuality.
Right.
If even I had difficulty with it, then that's a real telling tale,
Yeah. I mean, it's what I got out of it from your book made me realize that in my anorgasmia, like that was a time where I was the most kind of polyamorous, the most adventurous, the most play party centric. Like, I think that being anorgasmic actually gave me the ability to do that kind of stuff because I didn't feel anything.
Right.
You know? Like,
and also you feel adventurous too, because you're like, what is my kink? I want to find it. Like, I want to be turned on. I'm going to try everything. I'm going to try it with women. I'm going to try it with men. I'm going to try being submissive. I'm going to try being a top. Like, where the fuck is my kink?
Yeah.
Right?
And then the odd thing is, like, oh my God, maybe it's actually something that is so simple, like that. None of those things. Like, that could be like the really, the real kink is that we're actually way more simple than all the sexuality that San Francisco kind of lays on you. San Francisco is a very specific place when you're talking about sexuality and kink and all of that. I mean, it exists here, it thrives here. But then what if we don't need any of that? You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you get leather burnout or like...
I know what you mean. But I think it's about honesty, really, more than anything else. It's about doing things honestly because you love them, and not feeling pressured or weird or, people come and go out of my community, out of Kinky Salon, when they get into new relationships or when they're trying new things. And I think it's really natural for these kinds of communities to be cyclical too.
Right.
Like that you have your experience and you have your liberation and your opening and then maybe you move on. And that's not like, I'm not attached to it. There are some people who are like, Kinkster for life. Like I'm always going to be a top or whatever.
Right.
And I understand that those people have their experience. But for me, like BDSM was definitely something that I did in my 20s to work through painful things.
Right.
You know? Although it's still fun every now and again too.
I think it's great, but I just find that I would not have any kind of emotional connection with play partners, and it was a world that for me lacked a kind of simplicity and simplicity in terms of emotion that I needed. I think I'm probably in the wrong communities, and probably not playing like, I don't know, but I just never really got it. And I'm also kind of in between everything too, so I could never really forge a real identity. Of course I'm probably a bottom, but that's just kind of by default about a laziness.
You're a lazy bottom.
Lazy bottom. And the worst top. The worst, I can't do anything. Do you top for pleasure or just for performance? Or
for me it's more about role playing and it's more about silliness rather than actually taking that stuff seriously. I mean, people take it really seriously, and I understand that like role playing submissive dominant personalities is really powerful for some people and it's really their thing and they really love it. But for me, I just get too giggly and silly.
It's silly and fun. But that's part of it too, like that the play. What I love about BDSM is the playing, the costuming. I like the preparation, the real attention to detail, and getting into somebody's head is great. It's just if that's all there is, I think I need more in terms of. I'm like one of those like really annoying bottoms who needs a lot of aftercare.
Right.
I won't come out of subspace. It's a lot of aftercare. I've witnessed some pretty bad BDSM accidents.
Yeah.
So I remember this poor girl like lost feeling in her hands, and she still has the nerve damage.
Yeah, it happens. Well, that's inexperienced people, probably high and drunk, and I think that's part of it too. Let's be honest, we've both had our fair share of being drunk and high in play spaces.
Oh yeah, totally.
And I think that for me, a lot of my experience of disconnecting to my orgasm, disconnecting to people, to relationships, was because I had this buffer, between me and reality. And I think that some of the most dangerous things happen in the play space when people are drunk and high.
Oh yeah,
they really do. And also in terms of connecting to my body when I'm drunk or high, it's even more difficult for me to have an orgasm. So having that, having awareness around that and being like, okay, I'm not going to drink tonight because I want to play, or understanding that, okay, if I have a few cocktails, it's fine, but I have to let go of that idea of like climax,
Right,
So it's like understanding that now and understanding that that's actually really common and really normal, and there's nothing wrong with it, But yeah, it's definitely a complicated and close to my heart kind of issue, and so personal. These are stories that I only ever told my closest friends.
Right.
And so to have them, to be sitting here talking to you about this stuff is bizarre.
Mm-hmm. But it's great because, I think that's what people will connect with you through the book, because it's really a very intimate portrait of a woman's pain and sadness, and it's very, I think it's deep. It's really, you have the entry point of this amazing sexual kind of adventurer and architect, but then also you have you're also, you remember that this is somebody's daughter. This is a little girl growing up and coping with loss, coping with moving so far away to a city that could not be more different, to a culture that could not be more different. The other thing that's very startling is that you speak so truthfully for an English woman. Very, very rare, I think. Because, the fact about it is that I think British people, the culture is will really tamp down everything, so you just don't want to be the tall poppy, or you don't want to be too sexual, you don't want to be, and everything is kind of held together, and that's the way the society is held together.
Yeah, well, I always felt in England like an outsider. Like, I couldn't really understand why people were so strange towards each other. They wouldn't look each other in the eye. Like, if you go into a shop in England, you don't get eye contact with the salesperson. If you are walking down the street and you bump into somebody, they wouldn't even consider saying, "Oh, excuse me," So I felt like I was in this town that just didn't. I was like, am I just weird? Am I just a weird human? And then originally I thought I would move to America. Everything's going to be different in America. It'll be so different. And I moved to New York. Big mistake, because they're exactly like Londoners there.
Yeah, very much the same.
And then eventually I moved to San Francisco, and it was more like now I made sense, Now I was like, oh, this is a place where if you go to a bar and you're waiting at the bar for a drink, you turn to the person next to you and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And you have a conversation. Whereas in London, if you do that to someone, it's just weird.
Yeah.
People don't talk to each other unless they know each other in London, which begs the question, how do they get to know each other?
I don't know. Yeah. But then you'll find, once you get through that a little bit, then it's like they're just overly intimate. I think that when I lived in London off and on, working and stuff, and then I just noticed that everybody has a personality change about 5:30, because that's after the first drink at the pub. So then around true. That, everything really shifts, and then it's too intimate.
Right.
It's like, what happened?
Back off.
Yeah, it's really weird. But yeah, London can be a very cold, isolating city, which, I think it's got to affect you to some degree. And so then, but you're still able, which is remarkable, to be able to talk about all these different things and write about them, which is magnificent. So I think everybody should read this book. What kind of questions have people been asking you?
What, on this book tour so far? People have been asking me questions about my relationships. They've been asking me about my community and how it all works. People are very curious about the event that I throw, Kinky Salon, because it has this really unique vibe to it.
Right. And
people wonder how that works, how that happens. Because I've replicated this party in different cities now. It's happening currently in 9 different cities.
That's amazing.
Which is really great, right? But it's not like a franchise. It's more like a network of events that are creating an experience, replicating that experience of Kinky Salon. And there's like a formula to it, It's kind of like a magic spell. Like, you just put these Eye of Newt frog's leg in a cauldron and create Kinky Salon.
Yeah.
It's stuff like... it's very community spirited. So instead of like the anonymity that you have at most kind of sex parties, there's this incredibly welcoming, friendly, loving environment where there's a real community there. People really care about it, and they volunteer their time and energy towards making it happen. And I think that's like a real foundation piece of the events. And it's also incredibly creative. So we have themes, and they're super dressed up, and costumes, and we have a cabaret, and usually some kind of weird interactive performance art, and everybody dresses up. You're not allowed to come if you're just wearing jeans. You won't be let in.
Yes.
So it's got this creative vibe, which is also kind of, actually, that's something that's been done many times before. Since the 70s, they've been throwing crazy costume. In fact, since the Roman era, they've been throwing crazy costume sex parties. And then there's like safety, making sure that the space is really safe and people are taken care of. So there's all these elements that come together to create a kinky salon. And I think that's what people are most curious about with what I'm doing. Because it's funny, there's the book, but then everyone wants to know about kinky salon. People don't want to talk about the book, they just want to talk about kinky salon, which is kind of funny.
You really do introduce kinky salon in the book as this kind of utopia, the sexual kind of paradise where it seems like such an appealing thing. I mean, of course, your stories also around it are very meaningful and moving, but the gem of it is that you created this thing that's very exciting and can, kind of lift people out of this idea of like, oh, sex can be this and that. It sort of expands their idea of what sexuality is, and it takes the sleaze out of whatever is a sex party.
Right.
Or a key party or whatever.
Sleaze, that's the main
sleaze.
word.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're sleazy and creepy and weird. They are. I've been to those parties.
Yeah.
They are sleazy and creepy and weird. And if I had $1 for every person who came to Kinky Salon and was like, oh my God, this is not what I thought it was going to be. This is so different. I would be a rich woman. But I'm not a rich woman.
But it's great that you were able to create a safe space. And because the sleazy nature of that kind of stuff, I mean, it depends on how long you're in the community, and then you can find the right places, I guess.
Right. It's usually private parties that aren't sleazy, but most public parties are sleazy. And so I think Kinky Salon is really unique. It's a lot of thought and attention and care has gone into not just creating the structure, but recognizing the structure when it rises up in the community.
Right.
And being like, that's something that works. We should implement that. Like originally it wasn't a costume party. It was just a party with like leather and latex and stuff. And then every time we had a theme, people would be like, they would love it. And people would get really creative, and there would be like parties at people's houses, like hot gluing like flowers to bras and stuff to like, make their costumes. It was like created this whole other vibe. And we were like, that actually really works. We should do that for every party. So it's like recognizing as well as creating, I guess.
Seeing the patterns and then, create it around what you're doing. So when is the next party? I still haven't attended one.
You're going to love it.
I think I'll love it.
The next one is on December 20th in San Francisco. There are parties happening all over the world. So if you go to kinkysalon.com, then you can find the entire listing and all the different events that are happening and link through to all their websites.
But people really need to get the book for other reasons. The other stories in there, I think your writing style is really, really, it's very, it's particular to you, and I think that you should write more, you should write more beyond, whatever it is. It's like now you've written like this masterpiece, now you can continue to do, to do commentary on things, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm heading next, is being a kind of a spokesperson for this community and this culture that's happening. I feel like when I speak to people, there are so many people that I consider to be sex culture revolutionaries. Like I consider you to be a sex culture revolutionary. The work that you've done, like demystifying bisexuality and being a pervert and like all of that stuff is like amazing. And I meet people and I'm like, you're a sex culture revolutionary. I feel like gathering together all these people and like, being a spokesperson for that aspect of culture,
That's really great. Yeah. That's really great. So like, for me, I think my heroes were always people like Susie Bride and Carol Queen and Tristan and Melina's great too. Do you know Melina? Well, she's remarkable. And
she's great.
So there's a lot of people that are out there that are true visionaries in that way. Not as many men. I'm trying to think.
I know, it's funny. There are a few.
Race Bannon. Do you know Race?
No.
Race is great. Race is the reason why we know all the sailor knots. He wrote a book in the 70s, and it came with a piece of rope, and then it was all of the different knots that you can use from bondage. Because this is before Midori's book.
Wow.
Because Midori did The Art of Japanese Bondage, but before that it was Race's book, and it was all the sailor knots.
Yeah, but it is a funny thing because on the book tour too, on this virtual book tour that I'm doing right now, most of the people on it are women. And I was looking at it like these are the people that responded to my emails, and I'm looking at the emails list and I'm like, actually, yeah, they are mainly women. And isn't that a funny thing that women are the ones that are really kind of taking the bull by the horns in this cultural issue that we have around sexuality and saying, hey, let's shift things, let's change things.
It's all women and Dan Savage.
And Dan Savage,
he's a good friend of mine. He's really knowledgeable. You know, he's
amazing. Yeah,
he's amazing. And so, but yeah, mostly it's women, and mostly it has been women.
And there are some men too. There's Charlie Glickman and Reed Mihalko. There are some good people good guys too, who are doing it. Maybe it's women. Maybe people feel safer around women talking about sexuality, or I don't know what the issue is.
And Jack Moran, I think he died. Jack Moran used to be the authority on anal sex. Now I think he died, and now it's Tristan.
Right.
Now. It's a woman. It's good.
Yeah, it is
good. I hope that, you know, you are finding the right environment in terms of, like, people receiving the book well. I think whenever you go and talk about sexuality in any way in society, it's very difficult for women. And, and oddly enough, we end up doing the bulk of the talking about it. But it's I don't know why. It's very, I don't know, it's challenging. It's hard.
It is challenging. I mean, there's a cultural image of the way that women are supposed to be, like this whole anti-feminist backlash that's happening right now, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I'm a feminist. Yeah. I am absolutely a feminist. I believe in equal rights for women, and the fact that that is seen as something negative is just mind-blowing and shocking. And like, what are you talking about?
Or by women who say, "Oh, I'm not one of those feminists." And so, what do you mean? Like, you couldn't be where you are in culture if you were not a feminist or living by feminist ideals, or you wouldn't be here without the work of Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and Simone de Beauvoir, you know, all these people who were feminists.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's very weird.
It is weird. Yeah. We are in a weird place culturally around sexuality, and it's definitely challenging for women to be, like, sexually, like, available and talking about it and saying, yes, I like sex is fun, and, you know, all of that. It's very challenging for culture to hear that voice from women.
Well, and, you know, but it's like what you're here to say too is sex is more than fun. It's actually essential, and it's actually made me find out all this stuff about myself, and it's actually caused a lot of problems, and it's, you know, it's more than what we think. You know, it's actually for me, it's one of the things that kind of makes me understand life. That's the entry point of life to me is through sexuality, because I have had very long periods without it too, just out of guilt or shame or whatever it is, you know, that there's a real need for me to understand it better. So that's why I appreciate your work, because it helps me to understand my own journey more. You know, when people are really honest, as you are, then you feel like I have permission to feel the feelings that I had felt, because you are taking the time to write it out, you know? And so that's really healing for everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you.
It's great. Should we go drink now?
Yeah, let's go get a cocktail.
Okay.
All right.
That was a good interview.